You also talked a little bit about the question of the artist as a model sufferer. I guess that was a question that was posed to you among other Americans as well as a group of Europeans. What was the background of that?
The background is that Parquet, which is a Zurich, Switzerland-based magazine, has set up this format which they call, I think, a discussion or an inquiry, and they pose a question. They ask someone to pose the question for them. In my case, they called me, and I think they have a critic in Germany asking the same question. And then there are very short interviews with 10 or 15 people responding to the same question. And the question that they had, which Biche, who's the Swiss woman who's the editor, was interested in was, is the artist a model sufferer? And it was a question that I think she developed from an essay that was written by Antonin Artaud about Van Gogh's work. I think Artaud identified with the terrible, alienation of Van Gogh and the suffering, and the way that he viewed the artist as being this hypersensitive individual that society couldn't understand and ultimately destroyed. And I think that the question, is an artist a model sufferer? What I found was that people found it a preposterous idea, that people who are genuinely suffering are rarely making art. They don't need a role model in suffering. The idea of suffering, the suffering artist, is a very kind of 19th century idea and comes out of probably, I don't know where it really comes from, from Lord Byron or something. Arthur Danto, who's the art critic for The Nation and is also a philosophy professor at Columbia University, had a great answer, because he said, the model sufferer, and he said, isn't Jesus Christ the model sufferer? And he said, at least in, with Jesus Christ, there's the idea of suffering for redemption and the whole, and then he said, I don't even know where that idea came from. Like, where does the idea that suffering is a good thing, that this is, that something we should aspire to is to be a sufferer? And he found it he couldn't understand it. He thought it was this outlandish idea and was really sort of scratching his head over it. And then he ended their conversation. He said that he had been in a museum with the painter David Reed, and they were looking at Baroque painting, and they came across this painting by Rubens, and it's Rubens with his wife and baby, a little toddler, and they started to talk about Rubens and what they knew about Rubens. And Rubens had been, a diplomat, and he ran his art studio, and he was very successful, and he listened to music, and this was his second wife, and she had their last child, like 8.5 months after he died. So he said all of this sort of pointed to like activity and involvement, like right up into the moment he died. This is like not somebody, who's misunderstood or alienated, and who leads this very full life that responds to the rest of the world. He had, he had a happy home life. He had a good relationship. He had a, happy working situation, and the painter David Reed said, maybe more artists should think about being Rubens than thinking about being Van Gogh.